Hello, welcome back to Desperate Living, or if this is your first time here, welcome. Now, in our last video summarising what we'd learnt in 2024 from doing this whole YouTube malarkey, I asked what kind of things people wanted to see, and something that a few people said they wanted to see was more stuff on the books, of which we have plenty. What you can see behind me is a microcosm of our book collection, and bear in mind that these shelves are mostly double layered, so there's certainly plenty to show you. But where to begin? What do we show you first? Well, by pure luck, I actually received a box of books a couple of days ago, and it makes sense just to start there, I suppose. This is a very random selection of titles with one thing in common. They're all vintage. I say vintage, we'll get into that. They're all old adult books. Erotic fiction, sexy comedy, educational books, a bit of everything. I picked these up for a reasonable price online. This is the first box of old books that I bought in ages, to be honest, and I only had the slightest idea what was really in the box. There were a couple of titles that I was very interested in, which I'm going to save for a different video because they belong in a different video, but the rest, yeah, I had very little idea. So why don't we have a look at what we've got, starting with the Romance of Violette, which, as you'll see, is credited to Anonymous, that most prolific of writers. Allegedly actually written by Alexander Dumas of much more literary work fame. The evidence for this being by Dumas is slim, to say the least, but he does get credited quite a bit, and who am I to argue with that? This edition is from Tower Books in the US, published in 1967, and as you can see, it's pretty basic, pretty slim. This book is often combined with another book, Sweet 17. In fact, when I finally get round to doing my piece on the legendary Luxor Press and going through all the books we have of theirs, you'll see that very edition in there. But this is, this is a nice copy. Considering the age of these things, I'm always impressed at how good the condition is. God only knows where this has been hiding since 1967, but I'm glad it's come my way. Similarly, though in less good condition, is Memoirs of a Harem Girl, which is allegedly translated and edited by Ari Caldwell Phillips. I think all the evidence suggests that it's also written entirely by Ari Caldwell Phillips. This is not a long suppressed erotic masterpiece by any standards. Phillips, whoever that really was, seemed to write quite a few books about harem girls and harems and the like. Well, at least two or three, which is enough to make you think that it was a bit of a fixation. This one from Tower, again under the Senator edition. Not quite sure what that specifically means. This one hails from 1968, so it's not quite as old as the other one, but unfortunately, flicking through this, it immediately started to fall apart. This is the price you often pay with old books like this. If the cover might well be in good condition and the book might look nice, but the glue on the spine may well have gone, especially if it's just not been touched for years. So this is one that's in need of a little bit of repair, but you know, it's not that hard to fix these books up, or at least just to keep them bagged up so that they're nice and safe for when you get the time to do it. Similarly, of a vintage note is the Love Pagoda, which like Memoirs of a Harem Girl, is definitely playing on a fascination that people had in the 1960s for the sex lives of other nations, shall we say. In this case, China, ancient China. It's the amorous adventures of Simon and his 6 wives, not to be confused with Henry VIII, obviously. Introduced by Albert Ellis, PhD, who really was a sexologist. So it's genuine, and it's an old work of erotic fiction. This edition from 1965, published by Brandon House. Nothing on the back at all, apart from just a continuation of the cover art. But yeah, looks nice. It's a bit creased, but what can you expect? Rather less respectable, To Live in Lustland. Now, these particular kind of books, books that look like this, with cover art like this, with cover designs like this, from publishers like, who do we have here? Regal Novels, in this case, 1967. I have loads of these, just stacks and stacks. For a long time I was a big collector of this stuff. Fantastic imagery on the art. They always have good strap lines. They believed in sharing experiences. Erotic. Maybe not the best, but they're definitely emphasising the adult content, both with adults only and sale to minors forbidden, which seems like a bit of overkill. Yeah, I'm sure this will be fun. Liberty and license. Yeah, it's lust in a small town. Looks entertaining. Rather more basic cover-wise, it's Blue Love by Thomas Conrad. Thomas Conrad is not an author I'm familiar with, and attempts to look him up online suggest that it may well be a pseudonym. There's certainly no evidence of a Thomas Conrad who wrote novels. This is much later, 1972, from Midwood Books. And again, nothing on the back. Presumably, people who were buying books like this didn't feel the need to hang around in the bookshop too long reading a synopsis, or maybe didn't care about the synopsis. The cover told them everything they needed. Blue Love, and yes, the bit of blue. I mean, might have been sensible to make the entire cover blue, I don't know. Anyway, we shall see. You see there's a little bit of damage there. Get it away from the light. But nothing much, it's just general scuffing. Now come a pair of interesting titles, part of a long series of books, the Coxeman novels, written by Troy Conway. If you're not familiar with Troy Conway, you may, depending on your taste in pulp fiction, be familiar with his real name. Troy Conway was Michael Avalone, who also wrote as Nick Carter, writing various spy and adventure books, and then under his real name he did a lot of movie and TV novelizations. Beneath the Planet of the Apes, several Man from U.N.C.L.E. novels. If you've got a collection of old pulp fiction from the kind of 1960s into the 1970s, you will have at least one Michael Avalone novel, I'm sure. The Coxeman books are effectively kind of sexy, raunchy spoofs of the work he was doing with Man from U.N.C.L.E., I suppose, or of the Bond films. Coxeman is Rod Damon, who, as the cover says, is an adventurer. His adventures obviously involve guns, girls, and God knows what else. I do have one other Coxeman book, but I'm not as familiar with the series as perhaps I ought to be. They just hadn't really come my way until these two. The one that I've got has a very boring cover. It's a kind of late 70s reissue from the UK. These ones are, again, British editions, but Flamingo paperbacks. So this one is 1973. Eager Beaver. All the books have kind of sexual puns as the titles. And this one sees Coxeman in Asia. Where does he go exactly? Japan. Well, there we go. Don't know why they couldn't just say Japan. And he takes the Asian position, whatever that might be. The second one, The Cunning Linguist, where he battles the autoerotic enemy. Again, according to the back cover. Yes, he takes a savage licking. Well, there we go. Must be awful for him, I'm sure. So that's volume 31 and volume 32. I don't know how many's in the actual series. I should probably research this. It seems like a good story to do a larger piece on. So take this as a sneak preview of Coxeman to come. Sticking with none too subtle titles, Dr. Onan. Funnily enough, while I was trying to look up the author John Horn, who, surprise surprise, doesn't seem to exist, I did find that there's actually an American doctor called Dr. Onan. Well, you know, what can I say? This is from the Olympia Press, although it's obviously not one of... It is part of the Traveller series, but clearly by 1970, when this came out, they dropped the kind of standard green cover that makes those books look so fantastic and collectible. I've got some of the older Olympia editions like this, and you know, the cover art is interesting, but it's just not quite the same as that standard collection. But it's always good to pick up more obscure Olympia stuff. You know, they're definitely a publisher that I would look out for. Whenever their stuff pops up and it's a reasonable price, I'm more than interested. From Softcover Library comes The Lesbians, or The Lesbian, sorry. Only one lesbian, but there's two on the cover, so you can see when I was confused. Jerry Lee Baron, as you'll be unsurprised to hear, is not a household name, or indeed a real name as far as I can tell. But Softcover Library produced a lot of erotic books. This one is from 1969 again, so you know, they were doing that stuff at the turn of the decade. Getting into slightly raunchier covers, but obviously there's still no nudity. But you know, the books were ever so slightly more explicit by the time this stuff came out. The wars against obscene literature, at least, were... It's a battle that wasn't over by any stretch of the imagination, and one of the other books that I have in this collection that I'm not showing you now will definitely be part of a future video discussing the war on literature that took place between the 1960s and 1970s in this country. So this is an interesting one. You can see that it's certainly not aimed at lesbians, at least the strapline. There weren't enough men in the world to convince her she was normal. Doesn't sound like it's going to appeal to actual lesbians. I'm sure they'd find that quite offensive. But yeah, again, it's in pretty good condition, you know, for the age and what it is. I mean, when I'm talking about these books being in good condition, obviously, you know, they're not necessarily mint, but when you think that this is all sold as throwaway paperback stuff that people wouldn't hold on to, either because, you know, they'd be embarrassed, they wouldn't want it on their shelves, so it ends up getting stuck in attics or thrown in the bin. So it's amazing that these books even exist. The last of the fiction books is probably the least interesting because it's a far more recent book. You know, I would never have bought this from Nexus, who of course were owned by Virgin. They were publishers of erotic books. Black Lace were basically the woman's erotica, and Nexus were the man's erotica. And this is part of a bondage series, the Citadel of Servitude. It's from the Chronicles of Tormenil. Yeah, it sounds a bit too kind of sword and sorcery for my tastes. I imagine it's very much along the lines of the Gore books, which you know, I have discussed before. The same authors come up with titles like The Slave of Lidir, The Dungeons of Lidir. I imagine Lidir is the place where this is all set. The Forest of Bondage. Yeah, Aranash. again, will absolutely be a pseudonym. I did know a couple of people who wrote books for Nexus, often men writing under women's names. As I say, this isn't particularly interesting for me. It's strangely more beaten up than the books that are 30 years older than it. But, and as well as the market for erotic fiction, the 1960s and 1970s was awash with what we might call sex education, self-help, things to help you improve your love life. Obviously, the joy of sex was the big one, but there's just countless amounts of these out there. I've got quite a few of them, and now, thanks to this collection, I've got more. Let's start off with the sexual fantasies of women. Well, what might they be, I wonder? Hanya Kachansky, I'm not familiar with. Basically, she's exploring female fantasy. She's done almost 30, so 29. Tape recorded interviews with women talking about their sexual desires. So this is a bit of a kind of share height-like book, I suppose. So this one was published in 1976. This edition, the book was written in 73, so definitely around the same time that Share Height was doing her work as well. And goes out of its way to let you know that it's not pretentious nor pornographic, which might put off quite a few people. But I'm sure that if you were part of that audience for these books, and I'm not mocking them, because I think lots of people were genuinely buying these books because they wanted to improve their sex lives, and especially coming out of an era maybe when discussion of sex just hadn't been possible, and so they'd grown up fairly ignorant. They find themselves in the swinging 70s and want to catch up, as it were. So Mayflower, who published this, did a lot of this kind of thing. Usually they would have a whole list of them here in the back with their other books available, but strangely enough they don't have one here really, but they do list a couple of other books that they're selling, one of which we'll be looking at in just a moment. On a similar bent, Whisper in His Ear, which is of a much later vintage. This Futura book is from 1985. Leanne Gardner. Again, this is something that's pitched at a female readership, but in this case it's how to please your man, which I know is the kind of thing that would rile up a lot of angry feminists, but it's not saying be subservient to your man, it's just giving you tips on how to have a better sex life. If you improve one person's sex life, you probably improve the others as well. Again, this isn't a book that I would have necessarily chosen, but it was in the box, and so there we go. So next we come to a pair of classics of the genre, The Sensuous Man and The Sensuous Woman. The Sensuous Woman, is one of the Mayflower editions that I was just mentioning that were regularly advertised in the back of their books, and this one is from 1969. Actually, this edition, this special Mayflower edition, I'm not quite sure what that means, is from 1970. Maybe it's a tad expurgated. But The Sensuous Woman, certainly one of the most famous of the sex education books of the 1960s, and clearly followed by The Sensuous Man. I'm not sure if M and J are related. I've never actually read either of these before, so I don't know that it's the same couple having his and her points of views, or whether they're different. The Sensuous Man is from 1971. This one's published by Corgi. I'm not sure why Mayflower didn't have this one too, but there you go. So these are both titles that I've been looking for on a very casual level for quite a long time, so I'm kind of glad to have picked them up. And finally, we have an ABZ, or an ABZ, depending on where you are in the world, of Love, which is another of those sex education books with impeccable credentials. Inga and Sten Hegler were Swedish sexologists, and this is one of the essential tomes of the sex education genre. So this is quite an early edition as well. This one is... Actually, this edition is from 1971, but the book itself hails from 1963. So, you know, this had been through quite a few printings by the time this copy came out. As you can see, it's in pretty good condition, nicely, shinily laminated, wiped clean. And it's fully illustrated. Let me see if I can find a... okay. Illustrations are not exactly something that's going to work you up. But you know, this is something that was, yeah, a sensational book, a big bestseller, as it says here. You know, over 1 million copies sold in hardcover. This stayed in print for a very long time. I'm sure that by modern standards, it might be considered to be dated. Might be something that you would have to look at and say has old-fashioned attitudes. I don't know, but I do actually have another book by this couple, Living and Loving. It's buried up here somewhere. I did try and have a quick look for it earlier, but to no avail. So, you know, again, we might take a more detailed look at classic sex education books of the 1960s and 70s in some future video. So anyway, that's my new haul of smutty books, for want of a better description. So I hope you found that interesting, and as I said, we'll be doing a lot more coverage of books from the bookshelves, maybe a bit more kind of narrowcast focus in the future. If there's anything that you can see in the back here that you want further explorations of, then just let me know in the comments. Or any particular types of books or magazines. We are going to be doing fanzines quite soon, so I'm sure that will be something that quite a few of you will be really interested in. But if you like this kind of thing, make sure that you like, subscribe, share, hit the alert bell, all the kind of things you have to do to make sure that you never miss another of these videos. So, thank you for watching, and I'll see you again soon.